Sure if it did it start, Veronica? It did? Okay. Oh. All right. Okay, so everyone, welcome. My name is Ruby Garrett. I am the Assistant Director of the Mosaic Cross-Cultural Center, and welcome to the critical conversation of managing difficult conversations in your space. So today is kind of interactive to where we have students here that are going to talk about some stories. Just a couple of things. These are not their actual stories. So none of the stories actually happened to them. None of it happened on campus. But these are examples of real bias situations that could happen across the country, as well as other universities. So while they're saying these stories, just know it didn't happen to them, but these are real bias situations that can happen to them. And really wanted really kind of examples of situations of what could actually happen if you're in a classroom, one-on-one, even with another coworker. These situations can happen and these conversations can happen while you're here. And so that's why we wanted to have it as well. Feel free to comment on the stories in the chat. Some could be triggering. So I wanted to go ahead and let you know some can be triggering. You don't have to bottle those in. It's a safe space. Go ahead and feel free to use in the chat, have discussions on the chat as well. If you have to leave, of course, like I said, the recording will be available on the Mosaic. As well as in the chat room, it's not going to be present. So whatever you say on the chat, you can even have a Word document open if you don't want to put all your thoughts and everything on the chat, or you can even chat me privately or another coworker or colleague, just to kind of have those emotions there as well. Because like I said, maybe situations can be triggering, or it could be something to where it would possibly annoy you. So, but first up, we're going to have Sky, and she is going to talk about the first story situation. And better experiences if you want to go ahead and pin her, so you're actually having a conversation with her, because that's usually sometimes what happens in a conversation. Obviously, you're right there talking to the person. So, but yeah, Sky, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay. So my freshman year was really eye-opening. My first roommate seemed very cool, and I was getting along with her. The first week, though, she walked in with her friends, and she was showing her room around. Her friends have not seen me, I guess, because one of her friends said, "It's nice," and the other friend said, "Yeah, but too bad she has to share it with a ... And she said a derogatory Hispanic term. My roommate saw my face, and she shoved her friends out of the door and came back a few minutes later apologizing and that she doesn't think like that. I honestly was still in shock. I couldn't believe what I heard. We never talked about it again, and it was just awkward for a couple of weeks. Sometimes we didn't even see each other. Whenever we did, the interactions changed. She started getting very passive aggressive toward me. And one day I was feeling homesick, so I decided to cook a Hispanic home cooked meal that my mom usually makes. I told my roommate that I'll be in the kitchen cooking, and she was in her room with her friends. I started cooking, then all of a sudden I heard her say, "Ew, can you smell that? It smells so bad. How could they eat that?" Then I heard all of them laughing. I was really embarrassed, and I started thinking, does it really stink? Why am I eating this? I quickly finished cooking and cleaned so it didn't smell anymore. I took my food and I ate it in my room. Another time, I was in my room when I got out, I had a post-it note on my door. It said, "Can you turn your Mexican music down? I'm trying to study." And I was confused and mad. I didn't have my music playing that loud, and I listened to other types of music besides Hispanic, not Mexican. It just got worse from there until finally our RA got involved, and we got put into different rooms that semester. But that experience changed me. I was even thinking about transferring that semester, thinking I made the wrong choice coming here. I avoid her now, and we haven't talked ever since. I don't room with anyone else right now, and I'd rather be alone than have another interaction like that.
Thank you, Sky. So while Sky is moving, that was the first story. And then now Rachel will be the second story. But does anyone have any comments or anything? Anyone discussion? they're in the same room, so they're switching over. So the first one that Sky kind of mentioned was it is bias, it's bias report, and it didn't happen to her, but it's something that can actually happen based off of her race. And so, Rachel, if you want to go ahead and say your story.
I'm graduating this year, super pumped and very busy with work, graduate applications, and the last of my classes. I'm in my last classes, so the classes are definitely smaller. One of my last classes is with a professor that I've never had before. When I walked in, the class was definitely small, around 10 people. I took a seat in the room and it was clearly divided. There was only like 3 females and the rest were males. When my professor came in, he introduced himself to the class and we went over assignments, pretty typical for the first day of class. Then midway, we had a random conversation about the difference between males and females and their roles. He asked who was more nurturing. Everyone, mostly the males, said women were. I raised my hand and said that women are not just supposed to be viewed as the nurturing ones in a relationship. He looked at me and said, "You say that now, but wait till you get married and have kids. You'll be the nurturing one." Most of the females in my classes go to college, but when they get married, they just sit at home and take care of the house. My jaw dropped. I was like, what? He was saying we were just here to be here. I was just about to say something when he continued saying that men are typically smarter, which is why they're mostly in higher level positions. All the males shook their heads, agreeing with him, while the rest of us were just confused. What were we supposed to say? Is he messing with us? Class ended and I wanted to talk to him afterwards. I went up to him and wanted to say what was on my mind, but when he started talking to me and saying that he's glad that I'm in his class and that he's heard great things about me, also pointing out that I'm taking one of the classes that I need to graduate with him, he said, "What did you need to talk about?" I thought about it and I said, "Oh, never mind." I left and thought about what he said. I do need this class to graduate. There's nothing else that I can take. Maybe I can just get through this one. I mean, why am I going to jeopardize me walking across the stage because of him and what he said? I stayed in the class, but not that I can't drop it. I regret it. I hear his remarks every day, and even if I tell someone, no one is going to believe me. If he finds out, it's going to be worse. Less than 2 months, right?
Thank you, Rachel. She's transitioning to the third story, which OCL. Does anyone have any discussion, any comments or anything on that one? Okay. And that incident, it was with a staff or with a faculty and student. So it is the last story and it's going to be with a student and a staff member. Go ahead, OCL, whenever you're ready.
I work on campus, food services. It's such an easy job and it's on campus, so that's a plus for me. I used to work in the cashier area, which I really liked. I got to meet new people, talk to them, and it was easy. One day someone came in and that person looked really familiar. I realized she worked on campus and she was everywhere. She helps at events. She worked in the main student center. I said hi to her and asked how she was doing. She said fine, then asked me what type of sushi is good here. Before I could answer, she interrupted me and said, "Oh, well, you probably just eat rice and beans, so you probably don't know." I stood there and was thinking, is she joking? Before I could say anything, she grabbed her sushi and brought it to me to check out. She asked how much it was, and I told her, still confused. She gave me her card and then asked me, "What's your name?" And I told her OCL. And she said, "Oh, your English is really good. What part of Mexico are you from?" I go there all the time. This time I was mad. I said, "I'm from Fort Worth." She said, "Oh, so you probably don't even know Spanish," and got her card and started walking away. That was it. I was about to tell her everything I thought of her, but then my supervisor came out. My supervisor saw her and was like, "Hey," and started talking to her and joking around. They looked like they knew each other very well. They finished talking and the person started walking away, and my supervisor turned around and saw me and asked me what's wrong. I was about to tell her everything, but then I remembered how they were joking around and good friends. My supervisor is not going to believe me. She's going to say she was joking with you and she doesn't mean it. I said nothing. Then my supervisor left. I was so confused and upset. It lasted less than 5 minutes, but it changed me. She judged me by saying one sentence. The next day, I asked my supervisor if I can be moved to the back. I didn't want any more awkward moments like that or see that staff member again. When I see her, I avoid her. I don't really go to events anymore because I know she's there. I just don't want to talk to her again. I don't want to go through that ever again.
All right, thank you, OCL. Does anyone have any comments, any discussion on that? All right. Thank you, students, for saying it. You can turn off your camera if you would like. So those are examples of some bias stories, bias situations that can happen. These stories did not cover all of the situations that could happen. People always do like situations to where it's not only on their race, but on their gender, like what happened with Rachel. Also the assumptions of whether they're in a specific race, Hispanic, or if their pronouns are she, her as a woman, or even their sexual orientation biases, to where we didn't talk about situation, but there are situations like that as well, to where whether it's with a student, in a faculty or staff member. And one thing that I really wanted to point out, though, was that definitely it could happen to anybody. These were just students, but coworkers, whoever you're working with, colleagues, this can happen as well to them. And sometimes whenever we're in situations like this, it just happens to, we're right there and a person wants to just go ahead and talk, which is one of the reasons why I said it was good for you to pin, if you like to pin the person that was speaking, because that's kind of how the interactions are. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be a one-on-one situation. Sometimes these conversations can happen in your classroom or in your space, in your work area, to where it's very public, and you don't know how to handle a situation. You're kind of just there, and you're not really sure what to do. And so I have a couple of tips here. And of course, if you have questions, raise your hand, put in the chat, whatever you want to do. But a couple of tips that I would like to provide is, whenever the situation happens or you're just having conversations, is provide the space. Provide the space to have a safe space, kind of what we're doing right now, to where you can just, talk in the chat or you talk amongst colleagues, but provide the space to where the student feels safe, or the faculty or coworker or whoever feels safe to talk to you about it. One of the hard things to do is talk about these situations, and everybody has had these situations before. I remember reflecting off of what I experienced whenever I was looking into these stories. And so everyone had situations, and it's so hard to talk about, that the fact that they're actually reaching out to you and they're talking to you about it is a huge step for them. And so even if they're also providing the space in your classroom or in a 2 to 3 people that's just in a private little group, but it's still kind of public, the fact that they're also talking about it kind of means that they feel comfortable with you. And so it is really hard. Sometimes you have a meeting, you need to go somewhere, you're in a rush or something like that. But the fact that they're reaching out to you, probably need to think back and say, hey, let me provide the space for you. Because whenever you're in a situation like that, you would hope that someone provides a space for you as well. The second tip is, we reflect on who we are, we reflect who others are, but let them identify who they are. So whenever the stories, for example, when Skies, Rachel, OCL, the assumptions were happening, assuming that they were Hispanic, assuming that Rachel identified as a woman and that she's nurturing, she's having kids. But really, everyone has a story. Are you letting them tell their story, or are you telling theirs? And so that's something as well, as whenever these situations happen, and if you're involved in these situations, you have to think back and say, I have my story, or they have theirs. Why am I telling their story when they're telling me theirs? And so that's also a space as well. Whenever these situations happen, don't assume that, oh, it didn't bother them because blah, 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 blah. Let them tell them what happened. Like, why did it bother you? The third one is, you're not there to solve everything. So we work in an area to where, whether we're in student affairs like I am, or whether we are faculty members, staff members, wherever, we are there to fix problems, fix issues. sometimes we're not supposed to do that. Sometimes people just need to vent. They just need to vent to you and say, hey, this happened to me. But a question to ask them is, how can I support you? So one thing that I've heard in other webinars is that sometimes people know better about themselves than you do. And that's really difficult because sometimes you can give really great advice. You tell them this is what you should do, and then they do the opposite. And you're like, I don't want to give them advice anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. Well, maybe they weren't asking for advice. They just wanted to tell you what's going on. They just wanted to vent to you. And the really important question is to ask is, how can I support you? Because they live their life, they know their life better than you know theirs. So let them speak what's happening, let them tell you what's going on, and then ask them, how can I support you? How can I help you? What would you like me to do? And if they say nothing, then nothing it is. Sometimes it's really difficult and you don't want to do nothing. You want to just help them and, let them always be there and things like that, but you can't. So if they say nothing, then nothing it is. And you tell them again, next time you see them, say, hi, how are you doing? How's it going? And then if they want to tell you again, let it happen. But you can't always be there the whole time because they also find their way. The fourth thing is report. So I know this is difficult for a lot of people. I know in a couple of weeks ago, there was a bias incident report actually. And I know that something that's really difficult for people to do is reporting, whether you're a student, a faculty or staff member, or anything happening in the community. Reporting is very important. And just so you know, reporting, whether you do bias incident reporting or Title IX reporting, it is anonymous. You can have a chance to where it is anonymous. Though we would love to have more information, we love to know where it happened, what happened, so we can know what to do. The fact that you're reporting it and it's anonymous makes a huge difference. I've talked to some students, and even, for example, these students that said their story, and if it actually happened, sometimes it happened 2 to 3 years ago when it very first happened, and then they never say anything. Or if you happen to a colleague or something happened, and you ask them, when did this happen? This happened last week? No, this happened a couple of years ago. Like, well, I wish that we would have known that because we would have done something. And sometimes people don't want to report. They don't want to do anything. They don't want to mess with anything. But it would be the question of, if you're having the conversation, just asking them, hey, is it okay if I report this? I really don't want this to happen to you again or happen to anybody. It is going to be anonymous. I'll even put on the comments, please don't, whatever you want to put on the incident report. And let them tell you, like, hey, this, yes, this, but as well as sometimes when your situation, you do need to report. You do need to report because you're an advisor or you're working with a student. If you don't think you need to report, you should report it anyway. So it's better to report it than to let it be silent. And then you hear these stories and you're like, I wish I would have helped a couple of years ago. I wish I would have said something, because these could happen to you as well. And so we want to make sure that we can actually know what's happening on campus, because we can't do anything. We can't fix anything. We can't help any students or faculty and staff. We can't have these conversations without knowing what's going on campus. I think this was clearly evident whenever we had the hashtag Black at MSU Texas. The fact that no one really said anything. They took on to social media and they said it, and we're glad that they did that because we need to know what's going on campus. But the fact that also reporting, not only are we letting people on campus know, but the community, MSU community, anyone that steps on campus know that it's going on. So that's some couple of tips, really short tips right there. I did see a questions on here. Brittany, situations with a power differential on top of the respect are so challenging. Do students know how to report these instances? So I think students don't want to report. Whenever, especially the example with Rachel, and even with a staff member, the fact that it's somebody higher than them, I did pick those stories because it was evident that they didn't want to report because they don't know if it's going to happen, or they're about to graduate, they don't want to get in trouble. I know some people report it maybe after they graduate, or they're going to report it, later in the line. Some students don't know how to report though. So that's kind of up to us as faculty and staff members to educate ourselves on how to report and to let them know, hey, if this situation is happening, for instance, if you're having this conversation with a student or a faculty member or coworker or whatever, that you can report it. You can tell them, hey, you can report it. This is how you report it. If you don't want to report it, I can report it for you. Just give me the details, let me know. In our office, we talk to a lot of students, and we already know that students don't know how to report, or they don't think it's an incident. They don't think it's important. They don't know it's an actual situation because they sometimes don't want to admit it, or because they just don't think it is. And so we have to report it for them. And we go ahead and do that for them because they don't know as well. And so, especially in situations to where it is someone that's higher up than you, and whether they're nervous of doing it, they don't want to mess anything up, or they just don't think that it will do anything, they don't report it. And so it's kind of up to us as well. And just let them know. I know the Mosaic does presentations about the office, and they let them know that, hey, at the very end, you can report it. Unfortunately, this stuff happens. And so we need to make sure that they know as well. So as us, as we're talking to people, even our colleagues, just let them know that you can report things. So another comment on here, question is, what if we witness a situation? So that's another thing too. So I know that there was a situation, I had a conversation with somebody else, is that they witnessed something and they reported up the chain and they didn't want to do anything about it. So I'll go ahead and report it. You witnessed it. Go ahead and say, if you're comfortable saying who you are, go ahead and put it on here. Say, like, I saw this situation, this is what happened. Maybe not sure if it's something or it is this, I saw it happen. And in that way, we're able to ask more questions. We're able to know, especially if you know the details of a situation, to where maybe you know the student, maybe you know whoever's involved in it. Go ahead and put that information in there. But again, if you want to remain anonymous, at least we know that there is a situation. So that way, whenever we look into it and we're able to see it, we're able to investigate and see what's going on and say, okay, this is what happened. And that way we're able to at least have more information than nothing at all. So if you witness anything, go ahead and report it. Go ahead and have those conversations. It's, like I said, it's better to give us very little details than nothing at all. So that's very important as well. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Anything else, any comments? I know it's just me speaking now, so. All right, so one of the questions that we had in our, whenever you register, there is a little questionnaire if you wanted to ask any questions, is sometimes whenever we are in these conversations, sometimes we have to look upon ourselves. And it's really hard to be self-aware what's going on. So whenever you're in these conversations, you're not going to have the same situation as another person. It's going to be totally different. Very similar to the last girl conversation that we had about having empathy. You're not going to have the same situation happen to you, but you also need to make sure that you empathize with the person and understand what's going on. One of the things that you do not want to say is at least you know, no one was around when that happened to you, or at least maybe that won't happen again. It's one of those words that you don't want to say because it's very unsympathetic. So we want to make sure that we do not say those words. So making sure, as well as whenever these conversations happen, whenever it happens in your classroom or in your workspace or anything, you kind of have to reflect on it. You need to reflect on what's going on. So if you want to reflect on these stories, you know, kind of sit back after this webinar ends and you kind of reflect on yourself and say, what did I experience? Did I experience any bias? Did I witness anything that's going on? How did that make me feel? I can imagine how the other person felt. Because whenever you actually in that situation, it's totally different. totally different. And so we want to make sure that as you're hearing these conversations, whether it's in public, it's in the classroom, wherever it's at, we need to make sure that you empathize and you understand, again, provide the space, let them tell you the stories, let them vent if they need to, report if you need to as well. So if there's no other discussions, no other comments or anything, we're going to go ahead and start the recording. But like I said, this will be located on the Mosaic website. You can stick around. I just want to stop the recording so we can go ahead and do that. And then if you have any questions, you can stick around.